guys, it's Quana back again with another review. Hope you guys are doing awesome. All right, so today I'm reviewing Fear Street 1994. This is part one in a new Netflix trilogy based on the R.L. Stine books by the same name, or the Fear Street stories, and they're going to be coming out with a new part in the trilogy for the next few weeks. So it's a 3-week event is what they're calling it. This particular film was directed by Leigh Janiak and stars Kiana Madeira. It stars Benjamin Flores Jr., Olivia Welch, and it's got a guest cameo by Maya Hawke, the Stranger Things alumnus herself. This was a really fun movie. I am not a big horror movie watcher, although I am a horror novel fanatic. I grew up on Stephen King, and so definitely made my way into R.L. Stine with the Goosebumps series. If you were a kid in the 90s, you definitely read Goosebumps because you probably went to Scholastic book fairs where they sold Goosebumps. And then as you got a little bit older, you probably graduated to Fear Street. And so I remember reading a lot of these Fear Street books, and a couple of the killers are actually based on, or loosely based on, the actual novels. They play a lot with the lore, but they also create new timelines to create a very surprising and interesting film. I'm also a big fan of R.L. Stine's adult novels, and the very first one that I ever read was Superstitious, one of my favorite horror movies or horror novels to this day. I definitely think that that would make a great film. The Miramax, I think, purchased the rights to it in like 95 and then never made a film for it. So it would be great to see Netflix bring that particular novel. But let's talk a little bit about Fear Street 1994. Before we get started, do me a favor and click the subscribe button below so that you can join me over here. We're going to have a good time. We're going to talk about movies. It's going to be awesome. So I'm going to start with my non-spoiler review of this movie. Despite my trepidation in watching scary movies, I had so much fun with Fear Street 1994. So the film centers around this character named Dina. Dina is growing up in Shadyside, which is Killer, like Killer Town, USA, I think is what they refer to it in the movie. And there has recently been a massacre at a local mall, and her brother, along with some of her friends, kind of find themselves in the midst of a wave of new killings. Now, there's a lot of references and a lot of ways in which it plays on the horror genre and draws inspiration from films like Scream. It draws inspiration from Stranger Things, and I definitely think that that use of Maya Hawke was a good note in this particular film, and it definitely pulls on a lot of inspiration from other slasher genre films as well, but it does it in a very playful, lighthearted way, in the way that Scream did in the 90s. But I think at times this is even more playful than Scream. They definitely earned the R rating because there's a lot of blood and gore in this, but other than that, it's definitely a more lighthearted take, and I definitely think that this would be perfect for a teen audience. As Dina and her friends try to escape death, they end up learning that the killers that they are dealing with are not just manifestations of humans in the physical realm, but are also supernatural. So that's where it gets a little bit away from what we see in like a Scream. It kind of plays around with the supernatural. I had so much more fun with this than I did with American Horror Story 1982, or was it 84? I always forget. And the way in which this plays with the nostalgia, it's not very heavy-handed. In fact, there were times when I forgot that this was even set in the 90s, and it was only a couple of references here and there. And I think that was one of the only downfalls in the movie, as there are nuances and things that they bring into the movie very early on that set a tone that they very quickly abandon. Now, I will say this, I think they abandoned it for the sake of the story, and I think that that's a good thing. This has a very solid story. The plot is interesting. The character development is very interesting. I feel like I really knew these characters. When certain characters died, I was really upset about it because I felt like they found a way to really show us the bond that these characters had very early on. And I was rooting for a lot of the characters. And I'm not going to spoil for you who lives and who dies, or who tells the story. But see if you caught that reference. But I thought that the film was just very well done in terms of story and character development. And even the slasher sequences were really, really well done. I mean, one thing that I find myself doing, why I always say I'm not a horror fan, is because I spend a lot of time in horror movies covering my eyes, or if I'm at home, like fast forwarding to the part where the slasher appears on screen and they just go ahead and kill the person, so I can kind of manage the tension and the suspense that my heart is kind of going through in that moment. But I was not bored at all. I watched this movie straight through, no skips, no fast forwarding. I was screaming at the screen. I was talking back. And I felt like this was just a really fun movie. If I had some friends around, I would have loved to see this movie with them and be like screaming and throwing popcorn at the screen together. I kind of wish that this was something that could have been released in a theater because it was just such a fun watch. I think that Netflix really has a hit on their hands with this particular one. I'm a little bit nervous about what's going to happen when we get to the other two parts in the trilogy, because we go deeper and deeper in the past, and I don't know if they're going to be able to keep the same lighthearted notes that this particular movie brought to the table. Hopefully they will. Hopefully they'll find a way to bring the characters that are still living at the end of this movie into those other movies in a way that keeps that same tone. Let's talk about a couple of other things that I liked in this movie. The soundtrack at the beginning, the way that they used the music at the beginning, they pull in some really good 90s tunes into the beginning part, but then they don't really play a whole lot of music later on in the movie. And so I felt like that was kind of a letdown, because I really enjoyed hearing some of those songs that maybe I don't get to hear as much anymore. And they were really well chosen. But that being said, they were also extremely close together. So it kind of made it to where you just got enough of it to be like, oh, I know that song. And then you really didn't get to sit in that song for a little bit. And that was kind of, a little bit of a letdown. Like I said, I wish they would have used the music a little bit more throughout the entirety of the film. The other thing, again, it plays heavily on that 90s nostalgia. So it seems like we've kind of gone away from the 80s nostalgia, and we're kind of currently in this wave of 90s nostalgia. You got shows like Pose that have, been drawing heavily on 90s culture. And so this one, there were a lot of references, AOL chat rooms, that I just remember took me right back to middle school and high school. And again, you kind of lose that later on, in that the way that they're even dressed doesn't feel that dated. So you could definitely feel as though the second half of the movie could be taking place in 2021. And so I felt like there should have been maybe some ways in which that was a little bit more relevant. But I do appreciate that it didn't feel too gimmicky. So I'm not going to give that a full strike for this one. I really thought that this movie was enjoyable. Pacing wise, it was really good. It kept me very engaged. Character development wise, I thought that the characters were pretty well developed for a teen flick, a teen slasher flick at that. Could have done a couple of touches here and there to add a little bit more depth to Dina's character and Dina's relationship with her brother. But overall, I thought the secondary characters were very enjoyable and pretty well developed as secondary characters go. A couple of touches that I think missed the mark here and there in terms of the 1994 setting, but nothing so bad that it completely ruined the movie experience for me. Just wish they had carried some of the song selections throughout the movie a bit more prevalently, and maybe did a little bit more with some of the costuming. But other than that, I really enjoyed the movie. Definitely would give Fear Street 1994 a B rating. I definitely recommend, if you're a scaredy cat like me, watching it during the daytime like I have, so you have plenty of time to watch something very wholesome and sweet like Care Bears to, wash that out of your mind. But definitely let me know in the comments if you have watched it. What did you think? And I will check you guys out in the next one. Toodles.